Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories about the rural community in America and how it has been underserved. And now that the election's rolling around, everybody seems to care about the rural Americans out there, and yet they seem to have forgotten about them in between the time that they speak about them during elections. And we will also end today talking about the scandal that is emerging in New York with Eric Adams. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. Are rural Americans underserved by U.S. politics? Simple question. Yes or no? Give an explanation if you feel like it, but give me something, okay? Because I feel like I have an answer, but I want to hear yours. So let's jump into our first article about the topic of the rural population, how they're being underserved, what actually needs to happen in order to empower them, or at least give them a better chance in an America that seems to be focused so much more on our urban areas rather than our rural areas. If you can't tell how I would have answered that question, maybe that first little statement will give you a little bit of an insight. So we come to our article from the Washington Examiner. The headline reads, House Republicans urge Small Business Administration to enhance rural outreach. So when we come down to this discussion, you have probably heard all of the tropes. Oh, the rural Americans are forgotten. Oh, they have coalesced behind Trump because he is a man who is speaking about the common American and all these other tropes, which aren't necessarily untrue, but they are overplayed. As a person who grew up in, I would say, a rural area, but I was pretty close to the urban scene. A lot of the people that I knew came from the urban scene. A lot of the culture that informed my younger life is definitely from the urban scene. As I grew older, I gravitated back towards an area that was much more rural. And then again, there was a little bit of the urban sprinkled in where I was, specifically in the Shenandoah Valley. And things there were different than what they were back home. The culture there is very, very different. And I say that not to say that, oh, we're not Americans or we're not Virginians, and some things resonate between the generations. At the end of the day, we're Gen Z, we're chronically online. Things that were memeable in Northern Virginia were probably pretty memeable in the Shenandoah Valley. But that doesn't mean that people who are a little bit older didn't take a different approach, and even the kids within our generation didn't take a necessarily different approach. There was a common joke among one or two of my friends that they're going to sit back and just get their government money. And this is not necessarily the mentality that I heard when I was in Northern Virginia, but I heard when I was in the Valley growing a little bit older. And also, when I was going through the COVID times, I was mainly in the Valley, and everybody said, yeah, actually, we're going to take this government subsidies because it feels like they're actually outreaching us. They care about us. They care about every American. So this is a moment where we can say, yes, okay, government, thank you for finally looking at us a little bit differently. But they also have a very specific outlook on people who are from the urban section of America. And they're not necessarily wrong when they look at people from urban America who come down into rural areas and bring some of that urban attitude with them. Now, I've made this claim many a times. I will continue to make this claim. People in urban areas, they care about you to the extent that you get in their way or you're helping them. And that's not to say they're egotistical, self-centered. It's just that there are so many other things going on. There are so many other people around them. There's so much interaction, and everybody's packed in like sardines in these cute little towns that have a few skyscrapers here or there. And at the end of the day, you can get on a metro and get basically anywhere. But there's so much going on there that they don't necessarily want to look across the road and see the other person who is behind that counter serving them, or even the person they just run into on the street. Now, I've had many interactions with people across a whole bunch of different urban areas, and it is not 100% consistent that nobody cares. But you can definitely tell, on average, the segment of the population that is not necessarily happy, that is grumpy, that is bringing a little bit of sadness into your existence, it is increased inside urban areas. That could just be that there are more people there, therefore there's a higher likelihood of you running into people that are not happy or sad or just bring down your day or have a negative attitude. and they don't necessarily consider anybody but themselves, or they don't really care about what happens to anybody else. You go into some rural areas, and there are people that are sad, but you can always pick them up with a little bit of extra something. Maybe you give them a little smile, you start talking to them, and the best thing I can say is when you go into a store in the South or even in rural Virginia, and there's a amazing woman behind the register that is doing her best. She may be having a hard day, but you say, "Thank you so much, mama." That's all you have to say. Maybe if you throw it in there with a little bit of a southern accent, not like you're trying to speak to them, "Oh, I'm just trying to speak like you know," but you show that you understand possibly what their culture is like, and you give them a little bit of extra love, so to speak. It resonates. They're willing to accept it. They're not necessarily going to shuck it off. That is one of the great examples. When you go to Northern Virginia, there are some people who absolutely love it when you call them mama, but they are far and few between considering that when you go out to the rural areas, there are so many more people that actually love it when you say it to them. Multiple times I have tried to say, "Oh, how you doing, mama?" to somebody who's working in Northern Virginia, and they don't respond with, "Oh, I'm doing fine, young man," or something like that. They say, "Who you calling mama?" Which is fair enough. Fair enough. Some people don't like being called mama. I don't disagree. I just think it's interesting that they're concentrated in one spot rather than the other. And that speaks to the cultural divide between rural and urban. And why the rural population hasn't necessarily felt spoken to is because it's not a densely populated area. If you take a rally in the furthest reaches of Virginia down there towards Blacksburg, you're going to get a good chunk of people who are going to come out because it's a college town. You go a little bit further south, you're going to get less. It's just how it is. People have to drive from further in order to get there. When you're campaigning, you want a high density location in order to get as many people as possible. That's why a lot of people, even when they go to do rallies in states that are extremely rural or a majority rural state, they still do them in big cities because at the end of the day, that's where a large segment of the population is. So of course, people who are in those areas that don't necessarily get the love, so to speak, from politicians, just in their appearances alone, are going to feel left out. So what are the Republicans actually proposing here to help those people? Because at the end of the day, I went on a little bit of a rant as we were going into the first article. Let's actually take a step back, jump in to the article from the second paragraph. Quote, Rep. Mark Afford will introduce the Rural Innovation and Small Business Support Act, shared first with the Washington Examiner, that seeks to enhance the outreach of federal agencies to rural communities for key initiatives such as small business innovation or small business technology programs. So this sounds pretty darn good. I'll be honest. When the population that is growing up in a rural area, when they feel that they don't necessarily get the love, they don't necessarily get the funding dollars, they don't have the fanciest schools, they don't have the best engineering programs, they don't necessarily have the best chances of going to different colleges, then you're going to see a withering of that location. People who are actually able to get out, who are smart enough and able to put in enough work, their situation either allows it or they have enough individual determinism or even just luck to get out of those places, they're going to leave and probably not come back because they feel as though it is a dead-end location. So if you're going to use federal spending, which I do not think is the right way to use federal spending, and I don't think you should just hand out money to people and say, "Oh, this is going to necessarily fix the problem." There are other ways that you can go about it. Maybe it's cultural, but also ensuring that small businesses can move in, that you have low regulations within your town. Maybe you don't have really strict ordinances as to where people can build new things, because that can actually hold out a lot of people who want to build something in a community, but they're saying, "Oh, well, the zoning laws won't let me, and I don't necessarily want to be in said location." But those are all, we're going to put all those aside. We're just going to assume here that government spending is okay. We're going to make this hypothetical situation where we're not going to talk about all the other issues and we're just going to discuss what they're talking about here. So if you have federal spending coming in that is meant to help with programs that are actually going to benefit people in the future, so let's say technology spending or at least technology development spending, so companies can actually work on some of these more advanced projects, engineering projects in these areas that are a little bit underserved, or more specifically, it would probably go through the Department of Education to some degree. And would actually be maybe a STEM school, or there's one good example in the Valley that I know of, which is a technical school. These sort of things, maybe you have a computer science technical school, and it starts off as a small building where maybe you bring in 10 students a year who are interested in doing that in the future. You see if the program can actually take off. You build some connections inside the community, possibly get some internships going. And in theory, if this program is actually able to bring in people who have these capabilities and provide them with opportunities, whether it be internships close by or just more knowledge that they can use on a resume, let alone to get into college, then you will actually be building a base of people who can build up that community with new technology, more information, and when I say more information, I mean maybe a higher education level, which allows people to come back and actually be possibly more informed, but also just have more connections. At this point, college feels like you can get a lot of the information in college, not in college. What's nice about college is you get to engage in person-to-person interaction and actually fight about those ideas. And I say fight, not necessarily in a bad way, but have that battle between somebody else who holds a different idea. You can do that online, but it's not the same as doing it in person. And also, you gain connections by going to college. And that's what I feel like is the majority point nowadays, because like I said, you can learn a lot of stuff without necessarily going to college. But what else is involved in this program? Quote, small businesses and entrepreneurship are the fabric of America, Afford said. Too often, the opportunities to contract with the federal government are limited to coastal cities. The Rural Innovation and Small Business Support Act will force the government to include rural Americans in key SBIR and STTR programs. So this is the other part of what they're talking about. This is the entrepreneurship side, not just the actually bringing the companies that are tech side and getting the education system able to build up to it, which is actually an interesting point, because what they're saying is these business opportunities can go to small businesses and other businesses that are in rural areas. Well, guess what? If that company starts to grow, maybe it starts as a 2-person, 5-person company, grows to a 10-person company, they're going to start employing more people from the community. And as they get larger, they're probably going to need more educated people and people who are a little bit more specialized. So then you actually have an incentive to build up the local schooling system, and whether that be the company doing a little bit of a sponsorship for certain events. Maybe it's a science fair project, it's a special prize, so on and so forth. You get an internship for XYZ. You can see how the company would have a vested interest in making sure that the local community is thriving and ensuring that the next generation that is born there will actually be able to help the company continue to grow and be better. Now, this is all in a theoretical free market world. And like I said, we're putting aside a lot of different things in order to get here, but you can at least see the argument behind it. And what I think is interesting is it's really showing the focus, the sense of the importance of the rural voter coming into an election year. These issues always come up during election years. Then again, not just in election years, there are plenty of senators and congressmen who actually represent their home districts very well, that are majority rural locations, and they very much intend to bring these issues to the forefront, but it always seems to come out, the media covering of it, the more passionate speeches, the more closely monitored implementation of policy always happens to happen around election time. And I think it's because, one, there's an understanding that these rural populations actually don't get focused on as much, but two, because they are a crucial part of the electorate that need to be served. Whether it be the Republicans appealing to the farmers and the small business owners in these communities, or it be the Democrats appealing to the union members, there is always that concerted push as we come towards this first. Never mind. We're not going to go into all those extra details, but just know that when you see more of this, ask yourself why. Because they haven't been bringing it up before, besides maybe a few articles here or there talking about the general downfall of the rural America, or the question of why rural America does X, Y, and Z. But actual policy proposals always end up happening in election years. Then again, that is how politics seems to work. Let me throw something on offer right before it actually matters, and then maybe I'll follow through with it. like I said, there are people that actually try out there. I'm not trying to lambast everybody in government. I'm just saying, as a general trend, that seems to be what's happening. And it was funny to me when I read this first article, which is coming from a more conservative leaning site, to one that was leaning a little bit more liberal, which is prospect.org. And by leaning a little bit more liberal, they sometimes verge into the more leftist side, and sometimes they have articles that are not necessarily. So we're just going to call them a little bit left of center. And they're also talking about rural Americans. So when I saw both of these back to back, I was saying, oh, okay, so it's that time. We're getting into that season. And of course, there's going to be articles from both people trying to actually lay out their point for the rural Americans and what they can do for them. So here is the headline from the prospect.org article, Rural Americans Project 2025 Problem. And when I read this, and when I read the headline especially, but when I read this, I said to myself, this is less of a positive case for the people that are currently running on the Democratic side and more of a negative case for Republicans. And sometimes negative cases work. If you don't necessarily do it in a malicious, attacking way, negative cases can very well work on the American populace. So let's see what they have to say. Quote, people in rural areas are generally more likely to live in poverty and lack access to important social services than their urban and suburban counterparts. So as disastrous as these policies would be for most Americans, they would hit rural communities hardest. In fact, many similar policies have already been enacted in rural parts of the country, resulting in higher poverty rates, weaker infrastructure, and poor health outcomes. So this would be something to the effect of the 2025 proposal, that's what they're calling it, to slash social programs, to ban abortion nationwide, to eliminate corporate regulations. So I think whether or not I could argue properly that eliminating corporate regulations is going to actually, for the most part, going to boost communities and allow more investment to flow into said communities and make it easier for companies to grow, to employ more people. I don't necessarily want to cover that one as much because that is something that Republicans have wanted to do for a long time. That's not just a 2025 proposal. The slashing social programs, that one is something that while Republicans have been saying it for a very long time, I think it's interesting that Project 2025 addresses some of these things, where we can cut the budget, where we can actually limit the bureaucracy, how we can scale back some of these large tax burdens, that it may be staying in the vein of a true conservative, but it actually is a little bit antithetical to where Trump is on the issue, the person that is actually running for the Republican ticket. So when we look at this aspect of it, when we ask the question whether or not the rural population needs these social benefits, the answer currently is yes. I know a lot of people that are on SNAP benefits. I know, and let's be clear, that ranges from rural to urban. I also know more people in rural areas that are on SNAP benefits. Then again, that could be, and this is anecdotal, and let's be clear, there is statistical evidence as well that a large portion of rural populations are on SNAP benefits as well. So I'm not just pulling it out of nowhere, but from my anecdotal experience, there are more people on SNAP benefits that I know in the rural communities than in urban and suburban communities. So this means that this is something that they're going to care about. Because if you're saying we're going to take away, because SNAP benefits is a hotly contentious issue, there have been multiple bills passed throughout the United States where the Democrats have lambasted Republicans for changing the SNAP program whatsoever. Sometimes they're rightly asking questions, sometimes they're wrongly accusing Republicans of changing it. But the point being, when you come for somebody's food, when you come for the thing that keeps them alive besides water, and you're not going to, you could also say their livelihood, but we're going to stick to the part where you're going after their food, essentially, that is going to resonate. So when a Democrat makes an argument, or a Democratic or left-leaning institution like prospect.org makes an argument like this, it is going to resonate. And rural voters are sitting there saying, yeah, you know what? I don't want these programs cut. And that is why Trump can actually get away with getting a lot of rural voters, because he's saying, no, you get to keep your Social Security, you get to keep your Medicare, which are things that rural populations, just like an urban population, but rural populations too, very much enjoy the idea of having that sort of security backing them up. Because people in rural communities, Very seldom are you going to find a office or a large corporate headquarters in the rural community where people are laying back and making 120K. And when I say laying back, I'm not saying they're not working hard, but at the end of the day, they're making 120K per year. They're able to throw some things away for savings. They maybe have some stock options. There are plenty of people in rural communities who do really, really well, whether it be having their own small business, as we established here, which could benefit from regulation cuts. But, that's just, I'm not going to get too deep into that one again. But whether it be small business owners, whether it just be hardworking men and women who have ensured that they're able to live a little bit on the light side, but in return, and what I mean by on the light side is not necessarily having the fanciest of stuff, living within their means, and actually being able to lay back some savings. They still want that Social Security in order to retire properly and make sure that the work that they've put in their entire lives is actually able to be fruitful, that they're able to relax and enjoy time with the grandchildren, just like any other normal American, any other human being, for the most part, likes to do. Sit back. If you have kids, if you have grandchildren, you want to take that time to really enjoy it and also kind of spread the knowledge that you have brought to the table. So when prospect.org makes arguments like this, whether or not the conservative is going to sit back there and say, the true conservative is going to sit back and say, we need to repeal this, this, and this, there's a reason that Trump resonates with rural voters. It's because these things actually matter. So when Project 2025 comes out and stays on the old guard conservative line with a little bit of new MAGA pumped into it, yeah, that could very well be a problem if this message gets out to rural voters. Does that mean that it's being accurately portrayed? Not necessarily, but that doesn't matter because messaging is a lot. And do you think everybody's going to go read, as the article points out here in the very first line, the 922 pages of Project 2025? No. Then again, you could plug it into any AI system nowadays and just have it read it for you. You could actually probably listen to it if you wanted to do it that way. But the messaging is potent here for sure. So what else is happening that the article wants to call out and that negatively affects rural voters? Quote, consolidation affects various parts of the rural economy, but it's especially predominant in agriculture. Large companies like Tyson Smithfield receive the bulk of government agricultural subsidies and can use their economic and political power to control various aspects of agricultural production. Small farmers, especially young female and minority farmers, struggle to compete, often going into debt or being forced to sell their land. Even the inputs for farming, like seeds and equipment, are dominated by big players like Bayer and John Deere, end quote. And this is all true. And I want to take a step back because while you could say that this is something that is not necessarily benefiting rural voters, I agree, but this is not a problem that is just on the Republican side. Just because at Project 2025 said it explicitly does not mean that it is just conservative, okay? Both Republicans and Democrats have issues with how the agricultural system is structured, and both Republicans and Democrats are totally okay with how it's structured. And what I mean by that is there are different segments in each different group that actually would support it versus question it. And that is because for a long time, we have subsidized the American farmer. It started during a long time ago, long time ago, 40s and 50s. It was not necessarily just Democrats or Republicans then. It was a little bit more Democrats, but even then it doesn't matter because guess what? The Republicans kept it going because there was a certain segment of the population that voted for them in those agricultural industries / rural areas that were voting for them. And when you have that certain segment there and you're giving them a whole bunch of money, you're not going to necessarily say, oh yeah, I'm going to give you less money. Also, we created a protectionist system where I don't want to say the American farmer couldn't survive without government assistance, but they are one of the largest industries that gets government assistance and is one of our most protectionist economic policies. And yeah, that's not something that just Republicans or just Democrats get behind. Both of them do. It's the uniparty because they make a national security argument about the fact that we need to be an exporter. They also make a national security argument about making sure that we don't have to rely on other people for food, which is it's an honest argument. Doesn't mean that I 100% agree with it, but then again, It doesn't matter what I think, and it doesn't matter what the average American thinks, because they have their reasons, they throw it out there, and the uniparty votes on it. So this is not just something that applies to, oh, Republicans are trying to keep the consolidation going and actually disadvantage the American consumer. No, this is a Washington problem in general, and we've reached the point where I genuinely believe, without 50 years, maybe even 100 years of slow divestment, I don't think the American agricultural system would be able to be propped up like it is. It's already struggling compared to other countries and some new technologies that are coming out. So I think that this is not necessarily a win for Prospect's argument. That doesn't mean that Project 2025 doesn't actually say that we should cut down on some regulations on the agricultural industry, and that could hurt rural voters. I'm not disagreeing, and I understand where they're coming from, which is the monopoly in any of these industries hurts certain segments of the population, specifically BIPOC people or women of color, whatever descriptors they used here. They said yes, people of color, so BIPOC, and then women. So yes, they're saying that those people are disadvantaged, which is fair enough. But if the corporations are blocking people out of farming, it's not just BIPOC people and women. It's also the Joe Schmo, the white dude down the street. So trying to divide it upon those lines is kind of frustrating, and it feels like they're losing the plot here. They're making an argument about rural people, and I'll tell you now, rural people are not designating people by BIPOC or sex, and they're saying, oh, they can't do it. If Susie can throw hay better than Billy, guess who is going to be working on the farm? Susie. Okay? Because at the end of the day, you ain't get time to sit there and say, oh, well, we care about the genuine. No. Stuff's got to get done on the farm. If Billy is not going to get up at 5 a.m. in order to go do it, guess who is? Timothy. Timothy. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter. Because hard work matters more than the gender or anything to that sort. So I think they're just losing the plot here on some of their arguments, but I also understand where they're coming from about the consolidation in the market. I just feel like they go a little bit too astray in some points, and once again, it just demonstrates that some of the pleas, they may not make sense on either side, or what I mean is they may not be 100% coherent on either side, but people are trying to reach out to the rural community, and they're trying to get their message through. And whether or not it's actually effective, we'll see. I think that it's not going to be as effective as people think, because at this point, the rural population has a deep bias against anybody who says that they're fighting for their how should I say, their best interests. Maybe except some, Fox News or, CBS. Maybe there's a little bit of trust there. But even then, I think that the people that I talk to still look at Fox News and they say, oh yeah, no, it's a Trump loving network. Maybe not everything they say is 100% true. So I think there's a deep skepticism there because of how they have been treated in the past, or how they feel they have been treated in the past. And at this point, it's kind of blank pandering, but we'll see if it works out. Like I said, we always say we'll see, because pretending like I know everything is the downfall. That's arrogance that will lead to the downfall. There are always other possibilities. I just always find it ironic when hey, let's talk about the rural people, the chatter starts coming up once again. All right, so let's jump to our last story, and this one is I'm just going to outline some of the charges that are being leveled against Eric Adams. That doesn't mean any of them have been seen to be 100% true yet. I'm going to list them out. We'll cover this going forward as the proceedings continue. This is coming out on Friday. I am recording it on Thursday night, so some more information should be coming out during the arraignment on Friday. So let's actually talk about what he is charged on. Mr. Adams was charged with 5 counts, including bribery, fraud, and soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations. He was ordered to appear in federal district court in Manhattan on Friday for an arraignment before a magistrate judge. So most of these claims come from the fact that he was getting free flights, getting luxury treatment from Turkish delegate members, or just like Turkish Airways, and then he actually was able to push along the certification of a new consulate building. And there was reporting about this not that long ago. I believe it was three and a half months ago. I could be wrong when the rumblings first started, but the investigation has continued from there. Multiple people have resigned from his administration on other things. Basically, the idea is that this man is corrupt, and anybody that came in with him seems to carry that same hey, it's all about the money. We'll do what we have to do in order to get the money kind of vibes. So as this unfolds, we will see more. These are all currently things that he is charged with. He has not been convicted of, so it is all allegedly. And you got to add that addendum in there because we're not just trying to slew him. He says he's going to fight it out. He says he's going to do what he was brought into the mayoral office to do, which is fight for the people of New York. Kathy Hochul, this is an interesting wrinkle. Kathy Hochul actually could recall him. I don't know the technical name of it, but basically she could say, no, okay, we're going to take you out of the mayoral office for a little bit. She's still deciding whether or not to do that because she said, and I quote, I have to worry about the best interest. So the first part's actually kind of a paraphrase. It's something to the effect of, I have to look out for the best interests of people in New York City and also the people of New York State. So we'll see how all of it plays out. Maybe there will be YouTube videos by the time that this goes live where you could actually go immediately after this and you can go see what the arraignment looks like. I'm sure it will be at least on one or two front pages or the front of the website by the time this article comes out. So with that said, let's jump into our daily delight. And this one comes from our friends over at Woo Globe. Playful pup requests belly rubs from mom during photo session. And honestly, it was absolutely hilarious. This guy is begging. He's like, whoa, 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 what you doing? No, no, nope, give me some attention. Give me some attention. And then she's like, okay, all right then, because she's British. And he rolls over. He gets his little belly rubs, and he's a little content boy. And it is absolutely adorable. You know I say that every single time, but it's true. And hopefully it puts a little smile on your face when you go read it. It is in the link in the description below that like and subscribe button. You can also find the links to all of the articles from today. Go read them for yourselves. And there's stuff in there that I obviously couldn't get to. I didn't necessarily have time to get to it. So there's always more information there. Go read it and, digest the information. See if you think I'm wrong, right? So on and so forth. Also down there, you can find the link to the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And also every Tuesday and Thursday now coming out on this RSS feed and this YouTube channel is the 6 in 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. It's a little bit of international news, and we'll still cover international news here. There's an interesting China story that I want to cover coming up on Monday, but over there it's a little bit more bite-sized, and it really fulfills the mission of Daily Flip from the beginning, which is make content that gets news into people's ears very, very quickly. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.